Alright guys, so we're going to do a couple things to this case. I'll go ahead and leave the camera rolling, and try to explain this stuff as I'm doing it. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I've never built a motor on camera before, so I'll start with the gasket kit. You're going to have a couple different bags in your gasket kit. One bag will have all your different rubber seals. You'll have 6 seals, O-ring seals that go for your studs, your main studs. These 4 little seals here are for your rocker arm studs, and all these different seals are for different types of oil coolers. Most all the late model setups take 4 seals, 2 on the stand, 2 on the cooler. The early models would take 2 under the cooler, 2 under the cooler, 2 under the cooler, and 2 under the cooler, depending on which cooler you have. So we're not going to use those. Don't let me confuse you with that stuff. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our engine bearing dowels, and I'll go ahead and grab those from back here. If you're using the original hardware from the motor, this isn't an issue, but if you are building a motor from scratch, we could have an issue at this point. So this is something you want to pay attention to. These little bearing dowel pins are available in the aftermarket, and they go into the case and then they stick into the bearing, and you want to make sure that they're not too long. I know that these are the factory pins here. So the factory pin is 7.86, and here's one that's an aftermarket one. It's 810. Okay, that's a problem when you go to put your bearing in there and you bolt your case together. 789, exactly what the factory wants. They should be in the 7s, not in the 8s. What happens is you'll install the pins that you buy from the aftermarket. They make the pins too long now, and you put your bearing on top, you bolt your case in, and it crushes your bearing, and then your crank doesn't turn or drags and wipes the bearing out. So you always want to make sure that you measure your dowel pins and that you don't have the extra long ones that they like to sell you nowadays. So that's an important point that I can't stress enough. I see that a lot. Guys will go buy some dowel pins from their local parts supply house, and they're too long and they don't realize it. They stick it in the case and boom, then we have a junk motor. So here's where the dowel pins go. He's got these little locations that the dowel pin sits in. And you can see it doesn't stick up a whole lot, and the bearing sits in there and it locates the bearing. So we're going to go over to this side of the case. The side of the this camera stand is a piece of shit. The camera, damn it. The side of the case that has the oil pickup in it only has one of those in it. The side that's going to have all the oil galleys will have the most number of dowel pins. So we're going to need 4 for this side of the case. There's 5 total. These have all been measured. We know they're the correct length. So we're going to go ahead and install these now. Now these go in the lower holes in the center of the saddle. These are the oil holes. These are your dowel pin holes. So we'll go ahead and install our dowel pins. And you want to make sure that there's nothing crazy going on. If one's not sitting down all the way, then you need to check the hole and make sure it's clean. They shouldn't stick up much at all. Okay, next we're going to open our bearings up, and we're going to grab one of the center bearings. And this is our center bearing, and we're going to go ahead and install this in the case. The dowel pin always goes towards the flywheel. So there we go, we've got our center bearing installed. Now this is an important step. Do not install the center bearing on the other half of the case, and I'll get to that when we install the crank. I'll show you why we're not going to put that in yet. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is precautionary, and if you're a novice builder, this is a good idea. If you're a veteran Volkswagen guy, then don't even apply. I do this just because it makes it easy when you're lining the crank up. And so This is some advice you can use or not use if you're a Volkswagen guy, because some guys might be going, oh man, you don't need to do that, and if you know what you're doing, you don't need that kind. But anyway, so there we go. We got our bearing pushed down over our dowel pin, and we're going to take our rear bearing here. And what I wanted to do before I installed that is you want to take a black Sharpie marker, and I come right off the dowel pin, and I put a little spot on the case. Okay, so you know the dowel pin location is right there. Okay, now we know where our dowel pins are located. Pretty much at the bottom of the bore. You know that pretty much. Now we're going to take the bearing, and we're going to mark our bearing. Okay, we marked where our hole is at for our dowel. Okay, we'll stick that in the case. Make sure it fits nice. Now's the time to check these bearings and make sure they fit your case properly. Not after they're installed on the crank. So anywho, basically I'm just marking the dowel pin holes, and this makes it easier when you got the rods and stuff swinging on the crank. So there we go, and that's how they install. You put the bearing up here and you can turn it and you'll feel it fall onto the dowel pin. A lot of guys will do the mistake of not getting this all the way installed. They bolt it down, it crushes the bearing, and you know your motor's ruined. So now we're pulling these bearings out. We have them all marked. Our main bearings are marked for the proper location. Next we'll be moving on to the cam bearings. So I'm going to install the cam bearings next. You can choose to run a single or a double thrust, however you want to do it. High performance application, if you add spring tension, you know you always want to run a double thrust bearing. I like to run a double thrust on the stockers just because it makes the timing marks more stable. This is your thrust bearing. It has a shoulder on it, and that's why they call it the thrust bearing. This is what gives the cam the clearance and keeps it from walking back and forth in the case. So we're going to go ahead and install that in the case. And that's installed there. Now the next bearing is the center cam bearing, and the cam journal in the center will be larger than the bearing. So let me get this out of here. So it goes in the back here. That cam bearing, set that down, make sure these are pressed in, just use your hands. And your fingers on both sides of the bearing, make sure they're flush with the case there. Okay, cam bearings are installed. And I like to take a rubber hammer, rubber-based hammer, and just tap these, make sure they're seated down in there, you know, don't get carried away. You just give it a gentle tap. You want to make sure that the bearings have holes in them to feed the oil to the cam. You can go ahead and install the cam bearings on the other side of the case now if you'd like. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And move the camera over here so I can get you this side. It's basically the same as the other side. No difference. One day I'll figure out how to work this camera stand. It won't be so damn shaky. There's our remaining bearings. I'm gonna go with the rear bearing first. Put it in, line your tang up, and then push the bearing in. That's how I like to do it. Square it, make sure it's squared in there with a rubber hammer. Our front bearing going in next. There we go, our middle one. Then our front one. Sorry about that, guys, got ahead of myself. There we go. So we got all our cam bearings installed now, and we have our pin in the case, but we did not install our bearing. We do not want to do that until the crank's installed, and I'll show you why when we do that. All right, next on the case, I'm not going to make these too long because I'm having trouble uploading stuff right now. I don't know if it's the weather or what. Next, we're going to put our main stud seals on, and these are the black O-rings, white, depending on the gasket kit you get. And you just slide them on there and run them down to the bottom and get them seated down there. There's a little chamfer area where these sit. Very rarely do you ever get any oil leaks here, but you can put a little sealer on the top of this or in the corresponding seat where these seat. Some aircraft aviation Permatex. I don't recommend silicone inside the motor or anywhere near the main studs because it can cause you some issues. Silicone is not impervious to oil, and when it's introduced to oil it can break down and get into the pump. Okay, we have our 6 main stud seals installed. Next we're going to do our lifters. So we're going to grab 4 lifters, and yes, these are regrind lifters. So it's a stock motor though, guys, so I've never had a problem using them before, and I'm not going to be scared to use them this time. These are a lot better quality than some of the stuff that's available out there. You want to make sure your lifter slides up and down in the bore. It's very important that the lifter rotates. It turns with the camshaft, and if you get a tight one, move it to a different hole. And every once in a while you'll find a tight one. Sometimes you got to run a hone through them. Most of the time they fit pretty nice though. So here we go. And that's how it works. You can just move them around 90% of the time and find a hole that they like. All right, this is an important step. I know a lot of you guys out there do not understand this part here. I've seen some guys in the garage and even some motor builders out there. If you'd like to contact your cam manufacturer, they'll definitely back this up. There's assembly lube and then there's cam lube. And the difference between assembly lube and cam lube is that cam lube has a slight bit of grit to it to make the lifter to the camshaft lobe. And if you use camshaft lube on an engine bearing, it'll wipe it out. So remember that. Don't ever use cam lube on an engine bearing, ever. It'll be the end of your engine. You want to put a liberal amount of this break-in lube on the lifters. You know, there we go. And there we go. We got our lifters installed. We got our cam lube on our lifters, and we got our cam bearings in there. We got our bearing pins in. We have our center bearing installed. We have our bearings marked that are going to go on the crank. And this half of the case is ready pretty much. A lot of guys will build the drive gear. I do the drive gear after the motor's built, and I know that's probably not the correct way to do it. That's the way I was taught, and that's the way I've always done it. So we want to make sure that we get a little Earl on the center bearing there. I didn't squirt any on there. Do not get any oil in this area here. You know, these are our crush areas for the case. And if we put any sealer there, it'll be compromised by the oil. So we don't want to put any oil on our mating surfaces. You know? Alright, now let's install the rods on the crank, and then we'll make the end of this video, and we'll move on to the next one. So we have our crank cleaned in the stand. We've had it polished. We've got it back from the machine shop. These clearances came out to about 3 thousandths. So if you're interested in what the bearing clearance was, it's about 3. I checked 4 of them, and I didn't check the mains. I just checked the rods, and they were good. We'll be good at 3. And I'm just going to put a little Earl on the whole thing, you know. It's always good at this point to keep everything clean as possible. All right, here's our connecting rod, guys. We're going to use these brand new Volkswagen connecting rods. These are brand new pieces, never been run. OEM Volkswagen. This is what's available now. I don't care for these. They're all right for a stock motor. This is your bump, you know. This bump should always go up on the corresponding cylinder. Okay? Now they alternate. So I know that this is the rear journal and it's the most furthest one back on the motor. So I'm going to install the back one first. The bump's going to go up, and your bearing tangs always point down towards the camshaft on a Volkswagen. And what I mean by bearing tangs are the locks right here. And the locks always go lock to lock. So that's how the rod will bolt. There'll be a lock on that side and a lock on that side. Never a lock here and here. They always are next to each other, and they almost always point down towards the camshaft in this relationship. And you'll always have this bump, or it'll be a line on the forged rods pointing up in the corresponding cylinder that it goes in. So, all right, so let's put a little oil on the bearing, and we'll go ahead and install this. It's hot and muggy here now. Muggy is not even the word for what is in the air right now. So there we go. And this is personal preference. This next step, whether you want to do it or not, is up to you. I was taught to do this, and I've had a couple guys that have given me good reasons not to do it, but I continue to do it, and I've never seen any ill effect from it. I like to put a little Loctite on the threads, just a tad. If I can get it to come out of my tube here. There we go. These rods, the late model rods, do not have the little washer on the bottom of them. The early model rods have a little washer, and after you torque it, you can actually take a chisel and you can lock the nut down. So, and I always use Loctite on those also. It's just something that I was taught, and it's never really given me a problem, so I do it to this day. And so it's just extra insurance, you know. You can't take too many precautions when it comes to this kind of stuff, because when one of these comes off, it's game over. So. Okay, a lot of guys will come back to the rod and torque it. I don't like to do that. I like to torque them as I go. That way nothing gets forgotten, or no accidents happen. These get torqued to 27 foot-pounds. Most of the torque specs that I use will come from the Volkswagen manual. It's called Without Guesswork. I don't know if they're still available. They used to be available from the dealership. Scooter does have a few copies of them. And I like to get all my torque specs from those magazines, or those manuals, I mean, not a magazine. But anywho, Gene Berg did write some good articles on increasing the torques on certain bolts and stuff, and the effects that it has. So check out their website. And they did some experimenting with torquing the case nuts a little different and stuff like that. And some of it can be beneficial, so check that out. If you haven't already seen that article, it's a pretty good one. Now as we go down here through the sequence of putting these rods on, this is probably gonna be a terrible video. We know that the last bump went out that way. We know that this cylinder here is going over here. Okay, this is gonna be number 2, I believe. And again, we'll stand there and get the rag, wipe our hands off. Flies are buzzing me. I hate the flies, they're terrible. Put a little dab there. I'm gonna put a little dab over here. And don't get crazy with the Loctite, guys. You know, one guy that I really respect a lot, you know, he's an American car engine builder, and he saw me do the Loctite thing, and he didn't like it. He thought that the Loctite could get brittle and find its way into a bearing, and that was his only argument with it. So I've never actually seen that happen, so I'm pretty much staying with the Loctite. You know, it's just a little extra precaution, and I don't know, I haven't had one come off yet. Not even bend one, break one, lost bearings, you know, in race cars, but never a stalker. So we'll just stay with the methods that I've been using. You know, I know some guys do things different, and that's what's cool about YouTube. You can watch all the different methods out there. So we'll just pull on that, pull it back, hold it in position there for a minute, grab our torque wrench. Use a good quality torque wrench too, guys. Don't go to Harbor Freight and buy yourself a torque wrench and build motors with it. And if you do that, I guess if you have a friend that has a good torque wrench, sort of calibrate it with it, you know. Make sure that you're not over torquing or under torquing your hardware. And if we were using anything but Volkswagen rods and bolts here, I would be checking the rod bolt with a stretch gauge to make sure we had the proper clamp. But I know Volkswagen is pretty good about their hardware, and their stuff holds up pretty well. And I don't think we have the same worries that we do with the aftermarket stuff, so we're gonna not worry about that. Again, you know, you refer to your dot on your last rod, so it goes opposite on the next one. Tang's always pointing down towards the camshaft. Now we got to do our Loctite, wipe our hands. You need to just get into a sort of a routine, you know, when you do this kind of stuff, so you don't forget steps. And that's why I've never actually built a Volkswagen motor on camera. I have built other motors on camera, because when I used to work on the race team, they'd film everything that we did, and we would watch those films after the race, much like, you know, football players watch their films, and looking ways to improve our procedures and the times that it took to do certain jobs. But never a Volkswagen motor on camera. So hopefully this somebody will enjoy this. Some guys seem to like the motor videos better than the paint stuff, and you know, I got the guys that like the paint stuff, so it's a little bit of something for everybody, I guess. I really enjoy doing the Volkswagen, the mechanical stuff. You know, it's hard to get enough of it to keep you busy, and this is probably more what I'll get into, just because it's easier work for me than doing the body work and all the other stuff that goes along with it. You know, this is a little more cut dry. So there we go. We got one more rod to go here, and we'll be done with our rods. And then our next job for the crank will be to heat the gear up and install the timing gear onto the crankshaft. So that'll be in part 2, I believe, would be the best thing for that. Always look at your last rod that you hung. And, there we go. Roll that. Roll that. Just a dabble, do ya? These rods aren't near the quality of the old stuff, but there's a lot of this stuff out there that's going to become available. So you know, if you got it, you might as well use it. I talked to Scooter about it, and he said that he thought it'd be good in the stock application, not to trust it in the performance. So I'm going to take his advice and use it in the stock single port motor. And hopefully we won't have any issues. And it doesn't hurt to go back over every one of them after you do this one, you know. Drop that one, come back and check this one, and double trouble if you get one of these that aren't tight, guys. Want to make sure that you got the proper torque and that, you know. Okay. So we've gone over all those twice. We know that those are good now. You know, use some common sense at this point. Make sure you don't have excessive side clearance. That means side to side. You know, that should be about 4/1000 there. We know we have good rod clearance. We've already measured that. We have good, you know, everything's spinning nice. We don't have any friction in there. It feels funny. We'll go ahead and put these lifters in this side of the case real quick, and then we'll shut this video off and go to video number 2. So, you know, we're going to put a little oil on our lifters like we did the other sides. Slide it into the bore, make sure that it slides nice. Okay, it's very important that those lifters turn or it will wipe the cam out. And that's the problem with the new aluminum cases. You have to do some work on those lifter bores to make your lifters work. So we're going to put a little oil on each bearing surface while we're right here. Do not get oil on the cam before you put your cam lube on like I just did there, because it'll keep your cam lube from clinging to the metal. It'll actually get oil on it before you put the break-in lube. It'll won't cling and it'll wipe right off, and then you won't get the benefits of the break-in lube. So there you go. If you guys haven't seen the red break-in lube, this comes with the Engel cams. I like to use this. It seems to work pretty good. So there we go. And of course we'll have to install our crash and burn. Our 2 lifter retaining tools to keep these lifters from falling out when we put the case half on top of the other one. And we'll do that. Okay, so I'll probably go ahead and heat this gear up, put the bearing on, and get this crank ready to drop in before I turn the camera back on again. But basically, you know, we're going to heat the gear, we're going to slide the timing gear on there. Next will be our, well, I'll go ahead and just do it, make a video of it. And we might just have to break this into a couple of videos so it doesn't take too long to upload. And that way you guys can go back and break it into sections however you want to do it, or maybe never look at it again, I don't know. So we'll do a quick recap here of what we've done. We've installed our cam bearings. We elected to go with a single thrust bearing in this since it's a stock motor with, you know, stock valve springs. We have our reground lifters in there. We have our cam assembly lube on there. Not assembly lube, but cam lube. It's come in a little tube like this when you buy your cams. And we have our rods installed. We Loctited our nuts. We torqued our rod nuts to 27 foot-pounds. And we've installed our seals on our main studs. We put our cam bearings in this half of the case. We've installed our dowel pins. We've marked our bearings. And so we're ready to move on to the next step. We'll find a cam plug and we'll install some sealer on the case. We'll get the gears installed on the crank. We'll put the main bearings in and we'll bolt this puppy together. So maybe we can do it in 2 videos. We'll try that. And I'll go ahead and get this one uploading. And there you go, one crank assembly with the rods installed on there. And we use the OEM German crank with brand new Volkswagen rods. And so there we go. We'll see you guys in a little bit.